When you think of Bermuda, what do you think of? Do you think of its magnificent, beautiful beaches and sparkling blue waters? The old town of St. George's? Dockyard? Or even the wonderful civilians that live there? But you might not think of the history of Bermuda and how it has impacted the island today. Bermuda has much more to learn about than these few things. So come on down to learn about the cultural and heritage of Bermuda.
The Bermuda African Diaspora Heritage Trail, or ADHT, refers to the large scattering of the black slaves that mainly took place as part of the transatlantic slave trade from Africa. The ADHT was created in hopes to preserve the heritage and culture of those belonging to the African diaspora. All the sites in the trail include dozens of monuments and museums that are officially designated as UNESCO Slave Route Project. You will see a bronze plaque at each site having this official heritage status inscribed on it.
Located in Smiths Parish, off the Collector's Hill, Verdmont is one of the best properties owned and maintained by Bermuda National Trust. This elegant Georgian-style house was built in the early 1700s and had remained as a private house until it was sold out to the trust in 1951. The main architectural designs and constructs have remained the same over the last 300 years, although there has been major restorations work done. The earlier owners never had electricity or modern amenities. In 2001, the Society of American Travel Writers awarded the Phoenix Award to the Trust in recognizing the great restoration work done by them. In the 17th century, before the house was built, the property belonged to William Sale, who left Bermuda to become the first governor of South Carolina in 1670. The house was built by John Dickinson, who was a ship owner and was the Speaker of the House of Assembly of Bermuda from 1707 to 1710. Among its later owners was the painter and judge John Green. The house has 4 large chimneys and contains collections of antique Bermuda cedar wood furniture, Bermuda portraits, and English and Chinese porcelain. The period-style gardens have a panoramic view over Bermuda's south shore and include roses, herbs, and other plants cultivated in the 18th century.
It was built and maintained by slaves for over 125 years until emancipation took place in Bermuda, therefore freeing the slaves. The first owner of the house, John Dickinson, had 6 slaves in the early 1700s. The Verdmont cottage, located on the western side of the property, used to be the kitchen. Many years later, the number of enslaved people on the property rose to 14. The men were mostly laborers and the women mainly tended the house and the kitchen. There are a few outhouses in the property which used to be the slave quarters.
Verdmont House and the associated Verdmont Cottage have had a deep linkage with the legacy of slavery in Bermuda and are an important part of the African Diaspora Heritage Trail. The house has 3 floors and 4 chimneys, an excellent garden set with rose beds, palmettos, and a view of the hillside ocean. It also has one of the finest cedar stairs, which you may not see anywhere else in Bermuda, a drawing room and a parlor on the ground floor, many cedar and mahogany furniture that were designed and created in the 1700s, English and Chinese porcelain items, Georgian silver, including items made by Bermuda silversmiths in the 1700s, oil paintings, and portraits of earlier residents, and a child's playroom full of kids' furniture and toys.
So, first of all, I'm Julie Steele with the Bermuda National Trust, and we are in the attic. Dickinson to Joel. So John and Elizabeth Dickinson were the first owners of the house. They were actually the ones that built the house on this land, and the land stretched from the south shore all the way to the north shore. And when they bought the land, they were actually quite wealthy from an act of piracy, where they invested in a ship that went over to the Indian Ocean. It seized another ship, and they became very rich. And so they believe that this is how they had the money to build Verdmont House. And so the house, they believe, was built around 1710, and they owned that house, this house, and then through their granddaughter, who married Thomas Smith, the house was passed on to Mr. Thomas Smith, and Verdmont is located on Collector's Hill, which is actually named Collector's Hill because Thomas Smith was the collector of customs, and that was during around the 1770s, 1780s. And what we know about Verdmont and the people that lived and worked here is from an inventory that was taken while he lived here, and that was around 1782 that the inventory was taken. And that is actually explained in this panel here. And with that, they did a register of the number of slaves that were part of Verdmont at the time.
At Verdmont House, there was a total of 14 slaves at one time. Their names were Bacchus, Daniel, Mel, Joe, Rachel, Sue, Marion, and 7 children.
And the value of all the land was about 583 pounds in that time period. And the number of slaves that they had totaled 14 slaves. There were 4 men, I think there were 5 women, 5 boys, 3 women, and 2 girls. And when they assessed kind of the value of that inventory of people that were integral to making the entire property, work as far as the labor that was concerned with keeping a house like this together and keeping it prosperous, they valued the people for just as much as the property itself, which was 50 acres at the time. So what we know is about the people that lived here and worked here is from these types of records, and that is what we have, as far as the types of skills and the things that they would have done here included building ships. They would have also contributed to farming. They would have grown everything. They would have kept the house. They would have actually skillfully built the house and a lot of the furnishings that were here at Verdmont. So Verdmont is one of the sites on the African Diaspora Heritage Trail, and downstairs you can actually see that with this house there is no kitchen that's part of the main house, but the kitchen is actually a separate building, and it was also the slave quarters for Verdmont.
The way that we ensure that we continue and celebrate historical tourism is by ensuring that people understand the significance and importance of cultural heritage, and organizations such as the African Diaspora Heritage Trail that aim to preserve it. If people then understand the significance and importance of cultural heritage, they will then in turn value and appreciate it.
So come on down for a guided tour to learn about Vermont, or simply to enjoy its peaceful surroundings. Tours can be modified to accommodate any interest, whether it is about the people who lived and worked in this house, the collection of Bermuda furniture and antiques, the unique architecture of Bermuda, and Vermont's place in its history.
Sings a song just to say that